A frigate, Frigate, is any of several types of warship, the term having been used for ships of various sizes and roles over the last few centuries. In the 17th century, this term was used for any warship built for speed and maneuverability, the description often used being frigate-built. These could be warships carrying their principal batteries of carriage-mounted guns on a single deck or on two decks. The term was generally used for ships too small to stand in the line of battle, although early line of battle ships were frequently referred to as frigates when they were built for speed. In the 18th century, the term referred to ships that were usually as long as a ship of the line and were square-rigged on all three masts, but were faster and with lighter armament, used for patrolling and escort. In the definition adopted by the British Admiralty, they were rated ships of at least 28 guns, carrying their principal armaments upon a single continuous deck, the upper deck, while ships of the line possessed two or more continuous decks, bearing batteries of guns. In the late 19th century, the armoured frigate was a type of ironclad warship that for a time was the most powerful type of vessel afloat. The term frigate was used because such ships still mounted their principal armaments on a single continuous upper deck. The later 19th century battleship thus developed from the frigate rather than from the ship of the line. In modern navies, frigates are used to protect other warships and merchant marine ships, especially as anti-submarine warfare combatants for amphibious expeditionary forces, underway replenishment groups, and merchant convoys. Ship classes dubbed frigates have also more closely resembled corvettes, destroyers, cruisers, and even battleships. The rank frigate captain derives from the name of this type of ship. Age of sail. Origins. The term frigate originated in the Mediterranean in the late 15th century, referring to a lighter galleass-type ship with oars, sails and a light armament, built for speed and maneuverability. The etymology of the word is unknown, although it may have originated as a corruption of affractus, a Latin word for an open vessel with no lower deck. Affractus was, in turn, derived from the ancient Greek phrase Phi-Rho Alpha Kappa Tau Omicron Sigma Nu Alpha Sigma, or undefended ship. In 1583, during the 80 Years' War, Habsburg Spain recovered the southern Netherlands from the rebellious Dutch. This soon led to the occupied ports being used as bases for privateers, the Dunkirkers, to attack the shipping of the Dutch and their allies. To achieve this they developed small, maneuverable, sail-only vessels that came to be referred to as frigates. The success of these Dunkirker vessels influenced the ship design of the Dutch and other navies contending with them, but because most regular navies required ships of greater endurance than the Dunkirker frigates could provide, the term was soon applied less exclusively to any relatively fast and elegant sail-only warship. In French, the term frigate became a verb, meaning to build long and low, and an adjective, adding further confusion. Even the huge English sovereign of the seas could be described as a delicate frigate by a contemporary after her upper decks were reduced in 1651. The Navy of the Dutch Republic was the first navy to build the larger ocean-going frigates. The Dutch Navy had three principal tasks in the struggle against Spain: to protect Dutch merchant ships at sea, to blockade the ports of Spanish-held Flanders, to damage trade and halt enemy privateering, and to fight the Spanish fleet and prevent troop landings. The first two tasks required speed, shallowness of draft for the shallow waters around the Netherlands, and the ability to carry sufficient supplies to maintain a blockade. The third task required heavy armament, sufficient to fight against the Spanish fleet. The first of these larger battle-capable frigates were built around 1600 at Hoorn in Holland, carrying around 40 guns and weighing around 300 tons. The effectiveness of the Dutch frigates became most visible in the Battle of the Downs in 1639, encouraging most other navies, especially the English, to adopt similar designs. The fleets built by the Commonwealth of England in the 1650s generally consisted of ships described as frigates, the largest of which were two-decker, great frigates of the third rate. carrying 60 guns. These vessels were as big and capable as great ships of the time. However, most other frigates at the time were used as cruisers, independent fast ships. The term frigate implied a long hull design, which relates directly to speed and also, in turn, helped the development of the broadside tactic in naval warfare. At this time, a further design evolved, reintroducing oars to create the galley frigates such as HMS Charles Galley of 1676, which was rated as a 32-gun fifth rate but also had a bank of 40 oars set below the upper deck which could be used to propel the ship in the absence of a favorable wind. In Danish, the word frigate is often applied to warships carrying as few as 16 guns, such as HMS Falcon, which the British classified as a sloop. Under the rating system of the Royal Navy, by the middle of the 18th century, the term frigate was technically restricted to single-decked ships of the fifth rate. Those small 28-gun frigates were classed as sixth rate. Classic design. The classic sailing frigate, well known today for its role in the Napoleonic Wars, can be traced back to French developments in the second quarter of the 18th century. The French-built Ami Acute d'Acute of 1740 is often regarded as the first example of this type. These ships were square-rigged and carried all their main guns on a single continuous upper deck. The lower deck, known as the gun deck, now carried no armament, and functioned as a berth deck, where the crew lived, and was in fact placed below the waterline of the new frigates. A total of 59 French sailing frigates were built between 1777 and 1790, with a standard design averaging a hull length of 135 feet and an average draft of 13 feet. The new frigates recorded sailing speeds of up to 14 knots, significantly faster than the predecessor vessels. Like the larger 74 which was developed at the same time, the new frigates sailed well and were good fighting vessels due to a combination of long hulls and low upperworks compared to vessels of comparable size and firepower. The Royal Navy captured a handful of the new French frigates during the War of the Austrian Succession and were impressed by them, particularly for their inshore handling capabilities. They soon built copies and started to adapt the type to their own needs, setting the standard for other frigates as the leading naval power. The first British frigates carried 28 guns including an upper-deck battery of 24 9-pounder guns, but soon developed into fifth-rate ships of 32 or 36 guns including an upper-deck battery of 26 12-pounder guns, with the remaining 6 or 10 smaller guns carried on the quarterdeck and forecastle. From around 1778, a larger, heavy frigate was developed with a main battery of 26 or 28 18-pounder guns. Both British and American frigates could additionally carry smaller carriage-mounted guns on the quarterdecks and forecastles. Technically, rated ships with fewer than 28 guns could not be classed as frigates but as post ships. However, in common parlance most post ships were often described as frigates, the same casual misuse of the term being extended to smaller two-decked ships that were too small to stand in the line of battle. Royal Navy frigates of the late 18th century included the 1780 vintage Perseverance class, which measured around 900 tons burthen and carried 36 guns. This successful class was followed by numerous other classes that measured over 1,000 tons burthen and carried 38 guns. Heavy frigates. In 1797, 3 of the United States Navy's first 6 major ships were rated as 44-gun frigates, which operationally carried 56 to 60 24-pounder long guns and 32-pounder or 42-pounder carronades on 2 decks. By all regards they were exceptionally powerful and tough. These ships were so well armed that they were often regarded as equal to ships of the line, and after a series of losses at the outbreak of the War of 1812, Royal Navy fighting instructions ordered British frigates to never engage American frigates at any less than a 2-to-1 advantage. US Constitution, preserved as a museum ship by the U.S. Navy, is the oldest commissioned warship afloat, and is a surviving example of a frigate from the Age of Sail. Constitution and her sister ships President and United States were created in a response to deal with the Barbary Coast pirates and in conjunction with the Naval Act of 1794. The three big frigates, when built, had a distinctive building pattern which minimized hogging and improves hydrodynamic efficiency. The hull was designed so that all the weight from the guns was upon the keel itself. Joshua Humphreys proposed that only live oak, a tree that grew only in America, should be used to build these ships. The method was to use diagonal riders, 8 on each side, that sat at a 45-degree angle. These beams of live oak were about 2 feet wide and around a foot thick and helped to maintain the shape of the hull, serving also to reduce flexibility and to minimize impacts. These ideas were considered revolutionary in the late 18th and early 19th century. A three-layer method was used in which the planks along the sides of the hull were laid horizontally across the ribs, making a crossing or checkerboard pattern. The sides of the ship could be as thick as 25 inches, and were able to absorb substantial damage. The strength of this braced construction earned US Constitution the nickname Old Ironsides. Roll frigates were perhaps the hardest worked of warship types during the Age of Sail. While smaller than a ship of the line, they were formidable opponents for the large numbers of sloops and gunboats, not to mention privateers or merchantmen, able to carry 6 months' stores. They had very long range, and vessels larger than frigates were considered too valuable to operate independently. Frigates scouted for the fleet, went on commerce raiding missions and patrols, and conveyed messages and dignitaries. Usually, frigates would fight in small numbers or singly against other frigates. They would avoid contact with ships of the line. Even in the midst of a fleet engagement, it was bad etiquette for a ship of the line to fire on an enemy frigate which had not fired first. Frigates were involved in fleet battles, often as repeating frigates. In the smoke and confusion of battle, signals made by the fleet commander, whose flagship might be in the thick of the fighting, might be missed by the other ships of the fleet. Frigates were therefore stationed to windward or leeward of the main line of battle, and had to maintain a clear line of sight to the commander's flagship. Signals from the flagship were then repeated by the frigates, which themselves, standing out of the line and clear from the smoke and disorder of battle, could be more easily seen by the other ships of the fleet. If damage or loss of masts prevented the flagship from making clear conventional signals, the repeating frigates could interpret them and hoist their own in the correct manner, passing on the commander's instructions clearly. For officers in the Royal Navy, a frigate was a desirable posting. Frigates often saw action, which meant a greater chance of glory, promotion, and prize money. Unlike larger ships that were placed in ordinary, frigates were kept in service in peacetime as a cost-saving measure and to provide experience to frigate captains and officers which would be useful in wartime. Frigates could also carry marines for boarding enemy ships or for operations on shore. In 1832, the frigate Potomac landed a party of 282 sailors and marines ashore in the U.S. Navy's first Sumatran expedition. Common armament was one gun deck with 24 to 30 long guns, from 8 to 24-pounders, with up to a dozen light guns or carronades on the quarterdeck and forecastle above. Frigates remained a crucial element of navies until the mid-19th century. The first ironclads were classified as frigates because of the number of guns they carried. However, terminology changed as iron and steam became the norm, and the role of the frigate was assumed first by the protected cruiser and then by the light cruiser. For example, the Patrick O'Brien Aubrey Maturin series, Forester's Horatio Hornblower series and Alexander Kent's Richard Bolitho series. The Motion Picture Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World features a reconstructed historic frigate, HMS Rose, to depict Aubrey's frigate HMS Surprise. preservation and replication. 2 British sailing frigates, both of the Leader class, are preserved. HMS Trincomalee in Hartlepool and HMS Unicorn in Dundee. On display in Boston is US Constitution. Launched in 1797, she is one of the original 6 frigates of the United States Navy. As a commissioned USN vessel, she is afloat and maintained in superb condition by her crew. The Portuguese frigate Dom Fernando II e Gloria is preserved as a museum ship, presently being on display in Almada. Launched in 1843, it was the last Portuguese sailing warship to be built. In 1997, a project to rebuild a famous French frigate was able to lay the keel in a dry dock in Rochefort. The frigate Hermione was the ship that carried Lafayette to the U.S. during the American Revolutionary War. The original Hermione was sunk in 1793 off the French coast, and her wreck was rediscovered in 1992. Fortunately, the British had captured her sister ship in the Napoleonic Wars and had recorded her construction in great detail, which documents were then available for the reconstruction. The replica is faithful in almost every way to the original. The ship is 56 meters long and carries 26 12-pounder guns. The project site contains many very interesting photos of her construction. A site for the book to accompany her build and launch gives some summary details. Replica frigates have been used in a number of films. These include Grand Turk, playing HMS Indefatigable in the 1999 Johan Gruffud TV series Hornblower. Also replica frigate HMS Rose playing HMS Surprise in the 2003 Russell Crowe film Master and Commander, and also HMS Providence in the 2011 Johnny Depp film Pirates of the Caribbean. On Stranger Tides, Age of Steam, vessels classed as frigates continued to play a great role in navies with the adoption of steam power in the 19th century. In the 1830s, navies experimented with large paddle steamers equipped with large guns mounted on one deck, which were termed paddle frigates. From the mid-1840s on, frigates which more closely resembled the traditional sailing frigate were built with steam engines and screw propellers. These screw frigates, built first of wood and later of iron, continued to perform the traditional role of the frigate until late in the 19th century. Armoured frigate. From 1859, armour was added to ships based on existing frigate and ship-of-the-line designs. The additional weight of the armour on these first ironclad warships meant that they could have only one gun deck, and they were technically frigates, even though they were more powerful than existing ships of the line and occupied the same strategic role. The phrase, armoured frigate, remained in use for some time to denote a sail-equipped, broadside-firing type of ironclad. After 1875, the term frigate fell out of use. Vessels with armoured sides were designated as battleships, or armoured cruisers, while protected cruisers only possessed an armoured deck, and unarmoured vessels, including frigates and sloops, were classified as unprotected cruisers. In preservation, on display in Portsmouth is HMS Warrior, built in 1860. Warrior, constructed of wrought iron, was the world's first iron-hulled, armoured warship powered by steam as well as sail. She and her sister ship, HMS Black Prince, were the sole members of the Warrior-class ironclads. Queen Victoria's Black Battle Fleet, Warrior was used for 50 years as an oil jetty at Milford Haven before being restored to her former glory. On display in Ebeltoft, Denmark is the Danish steam frigate Jylland, launched in 1860.